right, we are live. This is Ask a Clutter Boss, and we're riding on a hope and a prayer that my internet connection stays stable because it has not been lately. So, welcome to life in the information superhighway where it just goes off the rails every so often. Good morning, everyone. This is Ask a Clutter Boss, the internet's best weekly decluttering advice show. Excellent. Thank you, Madonna. Today we have a special topic request, and that is emergency preparedness. So let me know in the comments how many times you have said to yourself, well, this would be good in the event of an emergency, or how much stuff you had bought in case of an emergency, or how much stuff you're just hanging on to because I might use it in an emergency, right? How many people, I know I'm not alone here. So I decided to do a little, and I'm going to look over on the side here because I have a second screen here pulled up. I did a little research about most likely natural disasters and disasters that we're going to face. And actually, interestingly enough, the Red Cross has a nice little map of the US, and you can click on it and see the most likely natural disasters in your area. Because I think we tend to be overly prepared okay, I'll just tell you right off the bat. Good morning, everyone. I have always believed that skills are more important than stockpiles, and stockpiles can get us into more trouble than having the stuff. So, if we're looking at what is going to make my life as easy as possible today, having a lot of stuff in our space is not going to contribute to an easier life, right? And also, when we're storing a lot of stuff, we are setting ourselves up for more accidents. So while we may be hanging on to things in case of an emergency, which one is more likely that you're going to need or be able to use the items when there is an emergency? Or are you creating a hazardous living environment for yourself in the meantime? And I think that that's a really important beginning discussion point. If you're creating a hazardous living environment by hanging on to stuff in case of an emergency, you're making you're making it more likely there's going to be an emergency by having a lot of stuff. So I think we need to get that clear in our mind right off the bat. Hanging on to things and having a large quantity of stuff in our house is inherently dangerous. There's dangers from tripping, there's dangers from things falling on you, there's dangers from entrapment, fire entrapment. It is inherently more dangerous to have more stuff in your house. And so if you are hanging on to stuff in case of an emergency or in case I might need it in the future, but you're increasing your risk of having a dangerous situation, then what's the point of hanging on to stuff, right? So I just think we have to be really, really realistic about the actual dangers of clutter, which we don't talk about very often. I mean, I talk about it all the time, but as a society, we're not talking about it very often until it gets like an extreme situation. But there are inherent dangers to having clutter. And if you're saying hanging on to stuff because you might be in a situation where you need more stuff, it doesn't make any sense. The logic doesn't logic. The math doesn't math, right? The logic doesn't logic. Now, if we're talking about I'm hanging on to stuff in case of an emergency, I think it's really helpful to define the emergency. There are some areas of the country where you are way more likely to have a very specific emergency. And in that case, you can figure out what that emergency is, or you know what that emergency is, and you know what would actually be helpful to have on hand. But across the board, the more stuff you have, if we're talking about a natural disaster, the more stuff you have in your house during a natural disaster, the more dangerous and costly and time consuming and difficult dealing with a natural disaster is going to be. So, while I'm not opposed to having some emergency supplies and materials on hand, the best thing you can do to be prepared for a natural disaster is get rid of a tremendous amount of stuff, right? Ironically, who is with me on this? And I see my internet might be a little wonky, so we'll just go with it. We'll just go with it. Hopefully the recording is recording well. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So Madonna says, I'm an ex mini prepper. Food expired, lost its freshness, rodents found it. I stress about not having the right items. You didn't store it properly, but now you don't know how to maintain it. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, in terms of the most likely natural disasters, I just want to share what they are. The number one most likely natural disaster in the United States is a flood. A flood. The more stuff you have in your house during a flood, the more difficult the remediation is going to be, the more loss of stuff you're going to have, the more damage you're going to have, and the more difficulty you're going to have cleaning up after a flood. I have worked with so many clients who have dealt with floods, not from like rivers overflowing, but from pipes exploding. A flood is an absolute nightmare. And having stuff that has to be moved out of your house and tossed, because when stuff gets wet, a lot of times it is not recoverable. It feels terrible. It would be so much better if you decluttered your stuff and had it stored properly so that it wouldn't get destroyed in a flood, than dealing with having to be forced to let go of things because somebody else made the decision. Not somebody else, but like because it got damaged, right? So number one, most likely disaster, natural disaster is a flood. Yes, Kesey, right. Kesey had back-to-back floods. I mean, it happens to so many people. DA, you are cracking me up. DA says scotch and vodka don't go bad. Follow me for more tips. I agree. If I were trying to, okay, hold on. There was more like, okay, most likely disasters. The number one man-made disaster that we face. So the number one natural disaster we face in the United States is floods. The second is severe storms, followed by tornadoes, wildfires, and tropical cyclones. All of these things, the more you have, the more difficult it is during that event. The number one most likely man-made disaster is a hazardous material accident. Guess what? When you have clutter, there is a much more increased likelihood that you're going to have a hazardous material accident because when you have clutter, stuff is typically not stored properly, and there's more of a chance that you're not going to see a hazardous material spill than if you didn't have clutter. So clutter exacerbates all of these hazards tremendously. The number one medical emergency that an American is likely to face is traumatic injury from car accidents, fall, or falls. Again, clutter can easily contribute to an increase in likelihood of traumatic injuries in your house. So, and then of course, cardiac arrest, heart attacks, and stroke are next. And if you have clutter, it is very difficult. It can be very difficult for emergency medical technicians to access you in your house. The overwhelming theme of this Ask a Clutter Boss is clutter is dangerous. So when we're talking about how can I be prepared for an emergency, my number one tip is declutter as much as humanly possible because you'll be so much safer and your cleanup and recovery will be so much better the less stuff that you have. And then whatever you do have and choose to keep in your house, make sure it's stored appropriately so it's least likely to be damaged. Although in a wildfire, in a flood, I mean, there's not a lot of things that we can do storage-wise to keep our stuff safe, right? So then the question becomes, what can I do? In case of an emergency, what do I need? From the Jess Marcy perspective, number one, habits. Habits help so much. Keep your phone charged. Keep your car gassed up. Know where your emergency batteries and flashlights are. Have habits in place to deal with emergencies. Prepare yourself by running through preparedness drills. So think about first responders and people who come in after an emergency. They're prepared because they go through training and they train for these events. If you want to be prepared for a disaster or an emergency, train. If you have a plan in your house in case of a fire. Go through the exercise of leaving your house, grabbing what you need, going to your meeting spot, train for the event. You're much likely to be in safer shape if you are practicing what we're prepared for. Stuff is never going to be the number one thing we need. We need to stay calm in emergency. You can prepare for that. You can practice that. You need to think clearly. That is a skill, not stuff. The more that you can be physically ready for an emergency, the better. Go on a walk. I mean, lift weights. These things make a difference in a true emergency, right? If you have to go up and down 10 flights of stairs in an emergency, are you physically prepared for that? There's so many things that we can do to be prepared that have nothing to do with stuff. Nothing to do with stuff. And don't forget your pets. Absolutely. Do not forget your pets. What are they going to need in an emergency? So according to the interweb, the other things that could be helpful to have on hand or to know skills, first aid skills, including CPR, knowing how to manage bleeding and trauma, knowing how to stay calm and make rapid decisions. In terms of stuff, do you know how to purify water? That's another top skill that's listed as a skill to have. If you practice or if you buy something to purify water and you've never actually purified water, there's a little bit of a learning curve there. So actually practice it. I do think that my backpacking skills translate well to survival, but when I get water purification for backpacking, I need to know how to use it before I go out into the woods. If I get into the wilderness and I've never tested out my water purification before, I am going to be stuck. I'm going to have to sit there, figure it out, hope that it's working, right? That's not what we want to be in an emergency. We want to be actually prepared by practicing. It says, okay, according to the internet, it would be helpful to have a 3-day supply of food and water on hand. I am curious, maybe not water, but who doesn't have a 3-day supply of food in their pantry right now? I don't know anyone. I literally do not know anybody who does not have a 3-day supply of food in their pantry. Do you know anyone? Now, water. Okay, a great way to store water is if you have any empty jars, you can fill them with water and just store them like as you would store. If you're storing empty jars, if you happen to be storing empty jars, fill them up with water. That's a great way to store water. Water storage, it's one of those things. The recommendation is 1 gallon per person per day on hand. Okay, or know how to purify water. Flashlight and batteries, a hand crank radio. Do we listen to radios anymore? Know how to tune a radio. I guarantee my kids do not know how to tune a radio. If I said to them, we have to listen to the radio and have a hand crank radio, they would look at me like I had 4 heads. They would have no idea. They don't understand anything about radios, right? So these are skills you can teach your kids. Cash, medication, and a whistle. Those are the other things to have on hand. Cash, medication, at least a 1-week supply, and a whistle. Cheryl, the Red Cross map, it's under redcross.org/get-help /how to prepare for emergencies. Well, anyway, if you search on Google Red Cross map or how to prepare for an emergency, it pops right up. And if you tell me where you're located, I can tell you the number 1 natural disasters in your area. For me in the Northeast, so mid-Atlantic, hurricanes and winter storms. And of course, in a winter storm, it would be helpful to know how to create a heat source. That's an important thing. Do you know that's a skill? Once again, another skill. Good morning, Carrie. So those are my thoughts about emergency preparedness. The best thing you can do is declutter your house. That is the ultimate. And then practice for the most likely emergency that you're going to have in your area. And then be prepared by knowing how to stay calm, having some first aid skills, being as physically fit as you can. Those are the best things, the best ways to be prepared. Have some water on hand, a 3-day supply of food. and just know what to do, right? In a wildfire or an earthquake, know what to do. Know what to do. But I don't think that we need to go out of our way to be buying stuff in an emergency, because if you don't know how to use it and you can't find it quickly and you haven't practiced with it, it's going to actually be something that encumbers your survival and doesn't enhance your survival. So that's the Jess Marcy be prepared note. All right, my friends, go out there, learn those skills that you need, and just remember, you are prepared for more than you are aware of. You are an awesome person. You're always learning, you're always trying, you're always growing. And those are skills that are going to take you very, very far in emergencies. All right. Have a great day, everyone.